It's the same hustle, it's the same pain, the same tears on every face. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one ghetto. It's the same sunshine, it's the same rain, the same struggle just to maintain. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one ghetto.
Greetings and welcome to another episode of Discussions with Indigenous Education, the Genocide of the Dark-Skinned Indian. In the last show, we talked about the We Charge Genocide report, which was a report that was filed by the Negro population back in 1951 against the United States, right? We also talked about the genocide itself, right? We talked about where it came from, and we also gave the definition, which is, I'm going to give the definition again right now. The deliberate and systematic destruction of a group of people because of their ethnicity, their nationality, their religion, or race, right? And you could basically go online at any Webster dictionary or, any encyclopedia and find that basic definition, right?
Basically the same thing, yes.
Right. They also learned that, genocide came out of a book in 1944 and that it was organized around the time of the formulation of the United Nations, right? It was the first instrument adopted by the United Nations, right? And so learned a lot in the last episode. So let's talk about the convention itself for a minute today, and maybe a little bit of the history of the convention, and maybe we might be able to get into some of the articles in today's show.
Okay, all right.
All right. And so let's start from the convention itself, review a little bit of information from the last show and then move forward.
Okay.
All right.
All right, well, again, this convention was taking place in 1948 at the newly formed United Nations. Okay, and it was initially signed in 1948 by 41 countries. So remember, initially 50 countries initially joined the United Nations. But with this, there were 41 countries that signed.
Okay.
And President Truman was the president at the time, and he was one of the initial signers in 1948.
Okay.
The convention was ratified in 1951. Okay, and some people may wonder, well, if they started and they were signing in 48, why wasn't it until 51
when it became law?
Ratified?
Right.
Well, that was part of the law. That was one of the articles of the convention. Let me read that article. It's Article 13, and it states, "The convention shall come into force on the 19th day following the date of deposit of the 20th instrument of ratification or ascension." So even though they had those 41 countries that initially signed, they had to also ratify.
As a country.
As a country, it had to get ratified.
All right.
And the United States in 1951 did not ratify it.
So they weren't a part of the initial group that ratified it and helped it to become law.
They were not a part of it for quite some time.
So let's just sidetrack for a minute and talk about this, because you say it's 1951 when when this becomes law. We also know that in 1951, the We Charge Genocide report was turned into the United Nations by the Negro population, right?
I'm sure that was the first report, genocide report, that was submitted to the United Nations, because again, they signed it in in 1948, okay, and then it was ratified in October, I do believe, of 1951. And in December of 51, they were at the UN submitting that report. Yes.
Right. And so again, all of these things are important. And again, it's important for us because, we also, and we'll get into some of the tactics that the United States used at the time to quiet this petition right? Which could constitute, where we think that some of those acts constitute genocidal practices, but that's what this show is about, right? And so, I just wanted to bring up the reality that the United States is dealing with a question of genocide at the time, and could be one of the reasons why the United States weren't one of the first countries to ratify the document.
And well, it was ratified first in 1951.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the 50s went by, the 60s went by, the 70s went by, and most of the 80s went by before the United States finally decided to ratify the Genocide Convention. So it didn't happen until 1988. Okay, well, President Reagan signed it in 86.
Okay.
But again, it didn't get ratified in the United States until November 4th, 1988.
88.
Yeah, isn't that interesting that it took the United States that long to ratify a genocide convention?
Something that they claim is the foundation of human rights. Well, the United States would say that the Constitution is the formulation and the foundation of human rights. There's a lot of inhabitants of the Americas that would consider otherwise, but again, it's the perspective of things, right? And so, a topic for discussion for another day. And so let's talk about, so it's 1988, right? Congress and Reagan, Reagan signs it, Congress finally ratifies it, and now the United States has also ratified the convention, making it law.
Making it law,
Mm-hmm,
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And as of 2020, and I think we mentioned this in the last show, that there are 153 countries now that have ratified the convention. But there are several countries that have not ratified the convention, even still today.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, there are 19 countries from Africa, 17 from Asia, and there are 6 countries in the Americas that have not signed on. 2 of those countries, and so I found out what they are. 2 of the countries are Guyana and Suriname that are in South America.
Okay.
The rest of the countries are in the Caribbean.
Okay.
Now, and I have the names. This St. Kitts and Nevis is one. St. Lucia is another one. Grenada. And then the Dominica or the Dominican Republic. Now, what is very interesting about Dominican Republic is that they were one of the initial signers back in 1948.
Okay.
So they initially signed on to the convention in 1948, but the country still has not ratified it to this day.
You know what else is interesting as we move into break? Grenada, right? That's really interesting to me because of the historical prevalence of that island to the Spanish and the conquistadors, and the conquest that the Spanish were doing down in the islands and in South America, using Ponce and Grenada, and man, there's so much to talk about here, right?
Yes.
All right. And with that said, let's take a small break here, right? And we'll be right back, right? And so we'll be right back with more discussions with Indigenous education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian.
An American Deceptions Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past, Volume 1, is a trailblazing depiction of the lesser-known history of America's dark-skinned indigenous peoples, now referred to as African American and Afro-Latinos. Red Silver Fox Thunderbird mends together indigenous oral history, primary sources, archaeology, and extensive research to paint a vivid picture of the original groups that resided in the Americas in the shadows of the continent's past, which include both Mongoloid and Negroid groups. Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past exposes the true history of indigenous Americans in contrast to what we have been told in school and what has been presented in entertainment. This miseducation and reclassification of the original peoples span over hundreds of years, but Thunderbird impressively lays out how identity transformation occurred. This book reveals hidden knowledge that shatters the accepted concept of the transatlantic slave trade and makes one question the African identity given to Black Americans and Afro-Latinos. Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past, Volume 1, is a noteworthy book that confronts an element of American Indian and Black history that many have not grasped.
You're watching Discussions with Indigenous Education on PhillyCam.
Greetings and welcome back to Discussions with Indigenous Education, the Genocide of the Dark-Skinned Indian. We're going to actually start to get into the Convention on the Prevention and Protection of Crime.
Genocide Convention.
The Genocide Convention, right?
Just say those terms from now on. The Genocide Convention.
Okay, so let's look at Article 1. Let's read Article 1 and Article 2. I think we might have enough time to go over at least those two articles and in this show. So let's read Article 1 and just really jump right into it.
Okay, well, Article 1 says, genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law which they undertake to prevent and to punish.
All right. And so that's really important aspect, right, in order to show, right, in order to prove genocide, right? And it's also important for us to acknowledge that, okay, you know, a lot of people think that genocide is just like harm against a person, physical harm or physical destruction.
Or just like a war with just bombing and just getting rid of everybody. Genocide.
But this is saying that genocide can take place in a so-called peaceful manner too, right? It doesn't have
peaceful times. Not a peaceful manner, just during peaceful times.
Okay, all right. So let's jump into that, right? What does that mean, right? And how does that look? You know, how does one describe genocide happening during peaceful times, right? You know, some of the conversations that's going to be important as we move forward.
Well, I think that really Article 2 really kind of explains Article 1 maybe a little bit further so that you can begin to understand really how these things can take place.
Okay, yeah. Well, so before we go into Article 2, I would like to state that, you know, genocide is a crime, right? And that as far as international law is concerned, particularly the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, as they said, you know, they've codified this as well in the 1988 Roman Statute, right? And so
1990.
Excuse me, I'm getting my 1990s and 1900s mixed up, right? In 1998 Roman Statute, for those that want to research that. But that's where the, you know, International Criminal Court, right, the court of the United Nations, finalized this and say, yo, listen, it's a crime whether in peace or at war, right?
And again, it's still interesting to see the dates that this took place. 1998.
I was born by then, y'all. Nah, I think I was a little bit older than just being born, but
I think you already out of high school and everything, college and everything by that time. Okay, but that's beside the point.
Okay, all right. So moving on, right? Let's talk about the convention again. During times of peace or times of war. Let's read Article 2, and that might actually help us to understand that aspect of the law a little bit more.
Okay, and this act is a little bit longer. Okay.
Okay. I think we'll let you read the whole act, and then maybe you'll read it again, and we'll ask some.
Break it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. A, killing members of the group. Excuse me. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group.
All right. So we got a little bit of time. We don't have a lot of time, but we got a little bit of time. And let's just read this one more time, right? And I'm just going to use one moment from history this, to see if, a brown-skinned people from, the United States, particularly from the South, right, fit into any of these categories, okay? So let's start from the beginning, okay?
You mean A, killing members of the group?
Okay, when DeSoto got here, right, describing the people as Negroid people, what's the first thing they did? They enslaved us, right? They put the dogs to us, right? What they called those slave expeditions that DeSoto went through Wally country, right? The South Carolina, Georgia region, right? Okay, let's go to B.
All right. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group.
Okay, well, does slavery count?
Oh, I think it just might.
All right, that's forcible. Okay.
And again, the indigenous people, which many people don't realize, the indigenous people were the first slaves on American soil.
And they were the first slaves being transported out of the Americas too, right?
Yes.
They were the first ones transported to the islands, if I'm not mistaken. Before any African was transported, they're moving people from mainland to the islands, to Grenada. How about that?
Well, no, that was basically to Hispaniola.
Okay, all right.
And Hispaniola was the Dominican Republic in Haiti.
Okay.
So that's where they were shipping them at first.
All right.
So again, like you're saying, that was 1520.
They know.
Right after the discovery of the mainland United States.
La Florida.
But the history records them as Negroes that were being transported to the islands. But wait a minute, if they're the first people that they're running to on mainland America, and later they called them Negroes, weren't they the Indians?
Well, again, conversations for us to go through as the series continues to grow, right? What's the next one it says?
Okay, the next one, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
All right.
Slavery again?
Slavery again. We could talk about
Jim
missions.
Crow.
We could, before Jim Crow, we could talk about the missionizing of the Southeast indigenous population, which was actually the tool that was used, that had the most effect on that population and getting us to assimilate to the colonizing agency, right? And then, again, we could talk about the Trail of Tears, right? The removal aspect of the situation, because, we could also talk about blood quantum. That's something that I would like to bring about, right? Because, utilizing blood quantum, unless cousins and brothers and sisters start to make babies with each other, sooner or later, there is no, there are no people that are able to claim that identity, right? United States still uses blood quantum today. Again,
We still use it, and it is the only people in the entire world that are defined by a blood quantum.
maybe so that they can control who is and who isn't.
You think, and maybe it'll, after a while, they will no longer be here.
Well, let's keep moving. Let's
Okay.
keep going.
Okay, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group.
Now, it's 2024 and we're in the United States. If anybody wants to take a look at that particular issue here in the United States, yes. Okay, again, men trying to tell women what to do with their bodies, right? What's next?
Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group.
Okay. and transitional schools, right? We could talk about the Indian, so-called Indian problem, right, in the United States. United States has a lot to talk about, right?
A lot to rectify.
Yes, yes, yes. And so, again, as far as we can tell, there's reason for us to continue down this path and see what else is happening with respect to this genocide and how it relates to a colored population here in the United States, specifically, right, a darker complexion indigenous population whose history, whose identity has been, erased by the colonizing agent.
Usurped.
Not even usurped, erased.
Erased.
All right. And as so, you know what? Let's stop here. It's time for a break, right? And
Okay.
when we get back from the break, we'll get into the articles a little bit more before we wrap it up for today's show, right? All right. We'll be right back with more discussions with Indigenous education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian.
Greetings. I'm Red Silver Fox, co-founder of Indeed Indigenous Education, and I would like to invite you to visit indedushop.com. That's indedushop.com, and help support our mission to educate the public of the omitted history of the brown and dark-skinned indigenous population of the Americas. And, as always, we would like to thank you for your support.
You're watching Discussions with Indigenous Education on PhillyCam.
Greetings and welcome back to Discussions with Indigenous Education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian. Before the break, we were going through Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, right? And it talked about things that would happen to groups, right? And that, these things that happen to these groups could justify genocidal practices, right? And so let's get back to that. But before we talk about the groups some more, I'd like to share some, legal information about the convention itself, right? And so, I'm going to read a little bit because I want these words, right, specific words that, the Genocide Convention itself, right? To constitute genocide, it must be proven intent, right? That intent really matters, right? I don't know how you could just wipe out a people unintentionally, right? But I guess things can happen with nukes and 10-ton bombs and stuff, right?
But that is something that even today, and we've seen that in some court cases today, where when things came about, and it's like, well, wait a minute, we have to know what the intent is.
Yeah.
We have to know what they were thinking, and that it was their intent to do this act, and not that it was an accident that it happened.
Right. Again, I'm not sure how.
It's very difficult to prove.
Yeah, but I don't know how you commit genocide by accident either, right? So, but nonetheless, we're moving forward, right? And so it says, there must be proven intent on the part of the perpetrators to physically destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, right? This is the thing I wanted to talk about more than anything else, right? Cultural destruction does not suffice, right? Nor does an intention to simply disperse a group. It is a special intent or dolo specialis that makes the crime of genocide unique, right? In addition, case law has associated intent with the existence of a state or recognized or organizational plan or policy, even if the definition of genocide in international law does not include that element. And so what they're saying is that they want to see some kind of business plan, by the state or organization, right, to prove that this state intended to do this, right?
That's why genocide is just so hard to prove. It's
Yeah.
just been, it's just been so hard to prove.
Right. But, so, with that backdrop, right, let's talk about the protected groups, right? We went through Article 2, right, where it outlined the things that could happen to groups. But what groups are they talking about? Let's go over the protected groups a little bit.
Okay, well, there are 4 particular groups that they mentioned, and you just mentioned them a minute ago: a national group, an ethnical group, a racial group, and a religious group. Okay, so now again, let's break those definitions down a little bit further so that we can know exactly what they're talking about.
Okay.
So, a national group means a set of individuals whose identity is defined by a common country of nationality or national origin. So again, that's easy for us
Right.
to see.
Right. That's anywhere.
France, French, Canadian, so whatever country they come from,
That's what they are.
that's their national group.
Okay. Do and dark skin or brown or colored people of the United States fall into this? Into a national group?
Well, if yes, because they are part of the United States.
Well, not only that, but we are a unique.
Citizens.
We're a unique aspect to the culture of the United States. There's a black culture, right? There's a black dynamic, right? We're filming this during Black History Month, right? And there's a white football player that just said that he did not come up with the fade. Right, that is not his thing, right? And things like that speak to the dynamic of the so-called black community, right?
Okay, well again, now see that and that particular thing could be defined maybe not under national group, but could be defined under another one of these definitions.
Okay.
Of groups.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's go.
Okay.
All right. What's another group?
Okay. An ethnical group is a set of individuals whose identity is defined by common cultural traditions, language, or heritage.
Okay.
That's your cultural tradition with the fade haircut.
Right. And a whole lot of other things that the black population, right? And for those that have been misidentified as being a part of the black, the so-called black culture, individuals such as you and I that are actually indigenous, right? And we can fall into that. And actually, a lot of the things that they state are black really are aspects of, the brown skinned indigenous population, coming out in what we call now as black culture. And we could just, list a few for the group. Do you even want to bother with that, or?
Well, maybe not right now. We can get into that later.
Okay, we can get into that later. I'm just saying, we'll be as many episodes for this series, so hopefully we can get into it later.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. I'm sure we will. Okay, the next group is a racial group, which means a set of individuals whose identity is defined by physical characteristics. So again, it's different than the ethnical group. Okay, so we're not talking about ethnicity; they're talking about the physical characteristics.
Right, and again, I'm going to just acknowledge that the darker skinned indigenous population from the Southeast here in the United States, we had a specific description when the colonizing countries were arriving here, right? And that description was lost, right? And they no longer offer that description of those particular indigenous populations from that region. They lump us into the black story of America, and our story gets lost.
Well, what is interesting is that, again, we get lost in the black story because the terminology that was being used to define the people of the Southeast was negro.
To describe
The people. Okay?
Right.
Their physical characteristics. So again, in those first books that were written by the Spaniards when they were first coming here, their descriptions of the people was that they were negros.
Okay, right. And so that's our description, right? And we're
So
not
why did that
allowed.
description get lost, or in translation it gets changed to something that is negative.
Well, that's why we're doing this genocide, right? And actually, we're going to get into that a little bit as you move forward. So let's get into the next group.
Okay, and this is the last group.
Okay.
All right, which is a religious group. And it is a set of individuals whose identity is defined by common religious creeds, beliefs, doctrines, practices, or rituals.
And again, we can acknowledge that, that the indigenous populations of the United States as a whole, right, had these things, right? With that said, it's time for us to wrap it up. And so let's go over some of the things that we went through in today's show, and then we can, talk about what we're going to go over in the next show. And so, again, we talked about the reality that the United States didn't ratify the Genocide Convention until 86, and it didn't become United States law until 88. Also would like to acknowledge that whether a country has ratified it or not in 2024, if you commit genocide, then you are found, then you can be held legally liable for that. It is a principal aspect of human rights, right? It was the first document that was ratified and put into law by the United Nations. And that genocide protects 4 distinct groups, right? And again, we just went over that one more time: national groups, ethnic groups, racial groups, and religious groups.
And it can be committed in times of war or in peace.
And it can be committed in times of war or in times of peace. And so in the next few episodes, we're actually going to get into some of the stages of genocide. There are actually various stages of genocide that has been outlined. And we're going to actually start talking about these stages and use historical moments of the past to
Represent.
that particular crime or harm being perpetuated against our people as a brown and darker skinned indigenous population. And so we hope that this has been informative. We hope that you continue to support us. Please stay tuned for the next episode of Discussions with Indigenous Education: The Genocide of the Dark-Skinned Indian.
It's the same hustle, it's the same thing, the same tears on the we fade. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one.